Alchemy Speaker Series Matt Martelli from Mad Media.
Welcome to Alchemy. Today we have Matt Martelli, leader of Mad Media, owner of the Mint 400, and here to talk about creative design.
Woo! Thank you. Like Wyatt said, welcome to Alchemy. The idea of this came from myself, Wade Rollins, and Richard Dirk, who are both teachers. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, alchemy is the seemingly magical process of transformation or creation, or creating a combination of things to create something special, right? And that's what creative is. And whatever form of creative you're doing, that's what you're doing. You're doing something magic. It's also, the point of this is to introduce you guys to successful creative people so you can understand how they got to where they're at and see the similarities between where you're beginning and where they're at, right? So that you can see that creative path. There's a lot of things in this world right now that are super hectic, and you have a choice of sitting around and complaining about them, or you can do something. So this is us as creatives doing something so that young creatives can see this way that they can make a living doing whatever type of creative it is that they decide to do. I want to start off with like how I got here and how I became a successful creative. And it starts my early childhood. I grew up in a very creative family, but really it sparked when I was in high school. I wasn't a good student. At 15, I probably wasn't going to graduate high school, and I walked into my graphics class. And I didn't really know what graphics was at the time. I just wanted to make T-shirts for my band, and I had heard that this class has screen printing, and you can make T-shirts for your band. I walked in there, and it opened up this whole world to me of graphic design. The interesting thing was that we were going through the evolution between digital technology coming in and analog technology going out. So I learned all the analog techniques. We had to use Linotronic typesetters. I learned how to run a press, learned how to screen print manually, cut Rubylith, all these things now that are obsolete. But I'm glad I did it because it gave me this really strong base. So during high school, learning all this stuff, we came to Palomar as a field trip. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, I can continue this and go to college and get a degree potentially and get a really good job doing this. This is great, right? So that's what I did. And it was really funny because everybody talks about, how they began and everything. So this is actually a pretty good one. This was one of the first things that I designed, or not one of the first things, one of the best things I feel that I designed. It's pretty funny and telling. So this is my graduation note in high school, and I'm going to read it out loud because it's how I felt. But you can notice it's got typography and texture, and it's well designed. So it says, "You are invited to attend the release of Matt Martelli from the Helix High Institutional Learning Facility on June 19th at 6 p.m., right? Felt like I was in prison there because I wasn't being allowed to focus on what I wanted to do, which was creative and graphic design. But going into that ROP program gave me a reason to get my shit together and graduate, right? And not only did I graduate, but I took extra classes because I was so excited and enthralled about learning about art and creative. And later on, it would come back to benefit me. All the art history classes that I took because I needed classes, right? So I was going to adult school at night, and I would take 3 or 4 semesters of art history and do it in like half a semester because I was so pumped about it. It was really cool. And then of course, graduate high school and you're like, now it's time to go to college, right? And I didn't come from a family that had a lot of money. I had terrible grades, so where was I going to go? Well, fortunately, Palomar was here, right? And I think it's a really important thing now in this day and age because as education gets privatized, it favors the wealthy, the people that are the haves, rather than people like myself who came from a family that didn't have very much, right? So, you know, I remember the high school guidance counselor sitting me down and saying, you know, you should really focus on being a construction worker, right? And I'm like, I don't know, what's that, right? And fortunately, I made more money than that counselor did in his entire life by the time I was in my 20s. So they were wrong. But this is me leaving to college, right? $500 VW, right? My dad push starting it because the battery kept dying. And it was like, cool, that's it, you're off, right? And so that's one of the things too that's important for you guys to understand is, you know, right now you may be looking at things and going, man, how am I going to do this? How am I going to afford to do this? And, you know, how am I going to accomplish these things, right? And my advice would be, we all started like this, right? You know, I lived for 2-3 years when I first moved up here. I worked at Taco Bell. You know, I ate top ramen and tacos. That was my diet because that was the cheapest things you could buy, right? But, you know, this facility is very unique in that it has multiple disciplines of creative. So while you're here, make sure you do as much as you can, because after you leave, the learning process becomes harder and more expensive. So if you're interested in photography, go take a photography class. It'll make you a better filmer. It'll make you a better graphic designer. And that was really one of the things that I started learning when I got here, was that creativity isn't just in a box. Like, if you're going to be a graphic designer, that's totally fine. But there's this falsehood about how your brain works. Your brain needs constant stimulation, no matter what creative discipline you're in, right? So whether that's through music or sculpting, glass work, welding, it doesn't matter. It's all creative, and it's all going to help you continue on. So as we were operating, here at this college, there was a group of us, and we had not just this college, but we had a organization that did all the magazines called Transworld Media, and it was magical. It was over in the Oceanside Valley. I went intern there, carried cameras for this guy named Grant Brent, who I didn't know at the time would turn out to be one of the most prolific skate photographers in the business. But we started in action sports. All I wanted to do is film my friends surfing, take photos of them, try and get a job, etc. And so I started very quickly working for some of the surf companies and some of the skateboard brands, and it was blast. I wasn't at that time. I wasn't making very much money, but it was super fun because you would go out and take a camera and go capture images like this, right? And you knew it was something special, and you knew it was something powerful, and then these images would turn into ads, and would there sell product, right? So it was a really cool time because you had people starting businesses and companies, predominantly in action sports. And so a couple of the alumni that were here with me during that time were Ken Block, Damon Way, Wade Rollins, and David Pershway, who went on to all be very, not just prolific in their fields, but affect culture globally, especially Ken and Damon with DC Shoes. And it would actually, again, the funny thing is being a creative, to me, is like being in the best club that you can be in, because it comes back. Years later, Ken and I would get together and we would, create a piece of content that changed the world. I'm going to get to that. But the imagery, what we started to understand is what we were learning and what we were capable of was very powerful, because we would shoot an image like this and it would sell surf trunks. People would get excited. They go, that's rad. I want to be like that guy. So these little light bulbs started going on, and I'm like, Then, I ran into a guy actually in high school, and he was a photographer, and everybody thought this guy was crazy. He was problematic to work with, kind of a weird dude. His name was Dan Harold Stewart, and I was skateboarding and taking photos of skateboarders at the time, and he calls my friend up, who's from this area as well, professional skateboarder named Matt Hensley. And he goes, hey, come down to this ledge. I want you to do this trick on this ledge. So I go down there and with Matt, and I'm trying to learn from this guy. I'm like, fly on the walls. It's really cool. This guy takes this photo, and this is pre-digital, so we had to wait days to process the film and look at the image. Look at the image, and I'm like, that looks amazing. This is a great shot. The trick was perfectly executed. And Dan looks at it, and he goes, it looks like crap, right? And I'm like, I don't understand. He goes, well, meet me back there, next week, right? So we go back, and Dan had cut the hedges down and painted the wall and picked a specific time of day so the light would be correct, right? And so Matt did the ollie again off this ledge, and that image is an iconic image to this day. So what it taught me is that it's not just, whether it's photography or video, it's not just capturing stuff, it's producing stuff. It's creating the environment and the opportunity. This is an example of that, okay? This is Caleb Wyatt. This is the very first backflip that was ever done on a motorcycle. And you've never heard of this guy because he faded into obscurity after this, but this was the cover of Transworld. It's the highest, to this date, it's the highest paid photo of any motocross, freestyle motocross photo ever. And it's because we set this up, right? We produced it. We didn't just go, well, we'll show up and see what happens. We actually didn't like this. We chose the time of day, and it was like this thing of like, okay, we're potentially making history here. So how serious do you take that? How much effort, how much work are you going to put into that? And that's the thing is, a lot of people think creatives are lazy, and really it's the opposite. I think, myself and some of the other creatives I know, are almost borderline crazy as to how hard they are. But it's addictive, right? Once you do something like this, and you get the cover of the magazine, and you create something that's not just cool, and it's not just you got paid for it, but it's an iconic image that changes history, right? So 40 years from now, people will still reference this photo, right? And that's the power, that's one of the powers of creative. So we're doing a ton of work in skateboarding, right? And skateboarding had this very like, hey, it's a formula. Show a banger shot, show the shoe, etc. And I'm like, guys, we're doing this wrong. We need to elevate what we're doing. And we were influenced by external advertisements in fashion and external advertisements in music and so on and so forth. So we created this campaign that helped launch a shoe brand called Osiris Shoes. And this was one of many pieces of creative content that we did for them. But we took out all the noise and we took them into a studio and shot them on white, which at that point nobody had ever done in skateboarding. So again, it was us borrowing creative from some other field to bring into skateboarding. And it was a huge success, right? This, among much of the work that we did for Osiris, they went from a startup shoe company to like $43 million in 3.5 years. It was a rocket ship, and it was a lot of fun because we were taking the concepts that we had learned working at agencies and doing traditional content, and we had applied it to, skateboarding, because both of the worlds had their failures, right? Skateboarding was like super last minute, like, hey, we got an ad due. Who's got a photo? What are we advertising? It was by the seat of your pants, right? And then traditional advertising was super planned out. Oh yeah, that was done 2 years ago. We're not going to change course no matter what has changed. And as you know, things change very quickly in fashion, right? So this was, a really cool example of us elevating creative in that market or in that culture to get people's attention. So the goal for me at working at Palomar was to just get a good job. I just wanted to get a good job, right? And I really didn't know, once I got here and started learning Photoshop and Illustrator and more photography and different design, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt like I wanted to do everything. And so what I did was I went out and I interned at as many places as possible, north of 20 places. I went and interned at the place that made billboards. I went and interned at magazines. I interned at, photo studios. Wherever I could learn something, I went and interned for free. And, it kind of sucked because I was broke, and here I am taking any free time I have and dedicating it to essentially what would later be my craft. But I'd like to say it was by design, but it wasn't. It wasn't on purpose. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. Like a lot of you guys are coming through this, and you're like, yeah, I kind of like this, but, I like music better, so I wanted to do something to do with that. So I go to work for an agency, and it was right at the tipping point where computers had come in. And so I was able to go into an advertising agency at 20, and they fired 10 people. They're like, hey, this kid knows all this stuff, he can do all this stuff, and get rid of all these people. And it was, it was fun, but it was also intimidating. But it gave me a lot of opportunity, and I very quickly climbed that ladder. What I found out in those years was that it didn't matter how much money he paid me. I needed to work on stuff that I was passionate about, because I wasn't passionate about women's hair care products. And that's what the agency I was working for at the time was focused on. And it was fantastic money, especially for my age. But I would not want to go to work. I wouldn't want to get up in the morning, and that's very unlike me, right? Like I love creative. I love graphic design, architecture, screen printing, fabrication. To me, it's super fascinating, right? It's a constant puzzle to be solved, and a constant, thing to be learned about. So, I was working with action sports brands on one side, and then had worked with agencies, and so I started my own agency. It was called Mad Media. This was our logo, right?
Now, okay. Since we're at ground zero right here, all right, you guys, I'm going to direct a little bit. Okay, filmers, don't be so stable. Get down there. Now he's talking about the meat of who he is. Get down there, get in his face, pull me in. If you got a zoom lens.
It's like,
Yeah, I was just looking at a lot.
You guys are being afraid of interrupting, and instead get yourself in a position where you can really show who he is. Matt, animate a little bit. Walk back and forth like TED Talk.
Sure.
No, don't do that.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, sorry. Let's take it from there.
All right.
Such a great talk.
No worries. So
Mad Media.
I'll reset it. So I worked at both traditional agencies and action sports brands, and they equally were frustrating because of their flaws. And so I thought, man, if we could take the tactical guerrilla marketing that we knew from action sports, and we could combine that with the discipline of traditional agencies, then we have something new, right? We have an agency that doesn't have their head up their ass and can respond quickly and look at trends and be honest about them and go, all right, this is what we have to do, to be modern, to be effective, to be part of the culture. And something that I would learn later that's paramount is to be authentic, right? So I started Mad Media, and Mad Media was started out of my bedroom. I had gotten a loan here at Palomar for a 2CI Apple computer, right? And that's basically like all I could afford. And I started just doing work for people, and the work initially, it wasn't work I wanted to do, but I had to pay rent. And my goal really was, hey man, I just wanted to pay rent and wake up every day stoked, right? And I was able to do that. And this is our logo. And I want to explain, this is called the Zero Sum logo. So it encompasses a lot of different influences that we had at the time. And one of them was punk rock culture that we grew up in, and skateboard culture, right? And this idea of commercialism, of you being the sum of all the things that you own, that's not who you are. You're an individual, right? And that's why there's the individual's me when I was a little thinner, right? Within the circle. So we start this agency, and very quickly I dragged my brother into it. He's away at college, getting a proper degree in music, and I'm like, hey, I told these guys we're gonna go film the skateboard tour, and I told them we're gonna put videos up every day, and that initially it wasn't work I wanted to do, but I had to pay rent. And my goal really was, hey man, I just wanted to pay rent and wake up every day stoked, right? And I was able to do that. And this is our logo. And I want to explain, we call this is called the Zero Sum logo. So it encompasses a lot of different influences that we had at the time. And one of them was punk rock culture that we grew up in, and skateboard culture, right? And this idea of commercialism, of you being the sum of all the things that you own, that's not who you are. You're an individual, right? And that's why there's the individual's me when I was a little thinner, right? Within the circle. So we start this agency, and very quickly I dragged my brother into it. He's away at college, getting a proper degree in music, and I'm like, hey, I told these guys we're gonna go film the skateboard tour, and I told them we're gonna put videos up every day, and that he had come back from college and thought he was going on summer vacation, and I sent him on a skateboard tour, and he figured it out, and that was pre-YouTube, right? So we had to kick out videos in 7 different formats: QuickTime, Flash Player, etc. And we had figured out that Kinko's had really good throughput, and they at that time didn't protect their network. So we actually scheduled the skateboard tour based on where Kinko's were at across the country. Because we'd roll into a Kinko's, plug the laptop in, and start uploading videos. They didn't even know what we were doing. We started running copies just so they would leave us alone, right? Because we'd be in there for 2 hours uploading videos, and they're like, hey kid, what are you doing? Right? And I'm talking about all over the United States. Well, we did this, and every stop we went to, it got bigger and bigger and bigger because all the kids were seeing it. And I knew right then that, what now has become social media was going to be a massive game changer. And we changed the game. So we were talking earlier about, affiliations. So back to when we were here, I became friends with this guy, Ken Block. He had started a t-shirt company called 8 Ball. He was actually screen printing them here, right? And I was running the lab, and so he would bribe me with beers to keep the lab open, right? And he would screen print all of his shirts here. Well, that company turned into DC Shoes, and we did some work together during DC Shoes. But after he sold DC Shoes, he called me up and said, hey, I want to go rally racing. We had connected on the fact that we both loved rally, and we would go rent Audi Quattros and beat the hell out of them on snowboard trips. So we connected on rally. Ken started rallying with Travis Pastrana, racing. We went out and started filming it. We didn't have a client at the time, but we knew this is badass, right? We knew we could do something with it. And it was really difficult for the first couple of years. We're out filming, and we weren't really getting paid. And then there was a camera technology that evolved. There was a HVX camera from Panasonic that came out, and it shot 60 frames a second, and we heard about it. So we were one of the first people on the West Coast to get our hands on one, and we took it immediately to a rally race. And we got incredible footage. At that point, nobody had ever seen slow motion of a rally car. And, we came back and started showing everybody these shots, and they're like, this is amazing. Well, we showed them the Subaru, and they were blown away. They quickly became a client, right? So we start doing work for Subaru. We're feeling pretty good about ourselves, but we still can't get people to care about rally. We're sitting around, we're talking about it, and we're like, hey, we need to do a film. We need to do a skateboard film with a car, right? To get people to care about what we're doing and condense all the action down into a shorter piece, right? Again, referencing skateboard culture. It's a skate film with a car. And that's how we started Gymkhana 1. play you a little bit of that. Oh, maybe. The internet cooperates, so I can play it for you. Yep.
Here, look at the lights.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Man.
Woo! Oh my god.
That audio should be playing through up here.
Yeah, it's not.
This is sick.
That's as good as my laptop gets.
It's probably connected to that PC, man.
What's that?
It's probably connected to that PC. That's Matt's brother.
Oh my god.
So you get the idea,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So again, the rad thing about this is like it's a theme that I'm going to keep talking about over and over, which is how powerful creative is, right? And the idea that if you can come up with a concept and you can bring it to life, that's a really powerful thing. And so what this video did is it completely changed car culture in the world, not just in Rally, but in the entire world. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of millions of views globally. It's been mimicked and copied and done, but we actually created a whole genre of automotive films, right? Which is still going on today. We shot and produced the first 3 of these, and then we went on to create multiple other series for other manufacturers, including the XP1K series for Polaris RZR, which launched this the sport side by side, which is a $15 billion industry now. So it's funny. It's like, go back to the pushing the VW Bug, out of your house, and okay, so this kid somehow is going to have an effect on car culture globally. How cars are perceived as cool. One of the rad things about this is that car, the STI, was actually a really dope car, but nobody knew about it because Subaru was terrible at marketing it, right? They had a fantastic product, but they didn't know how to market it. We walk in and literally save them, kind of, and turn that into the most desirable car for young people in America, right?
How many hits?
Hundreds of millions. I mean, it's been knocked off so many times and reposted so many different places. But to give you an idea of scale, the biggest automotive race in the world hasn't got as many views as this video, right? So it just shows you the power of when you really do something that's creative, and you're not. The other point is that there are rules. There's rules to graphic design. There's rules to all these different things, and generally that's a guideline. But this, we broke all the rules, and it worked. People were telling me, oh yeah, everybody has a short attention span. It should only be 3 minutes. It should only be 2 minutes, right?
I want to interrupt. I'm just going to say something because she just said something that's so key in that it's cool to break the rules, but you got to know them.
Yeah.
Like,
100%.
it's like you don't have the rules, you don't even know you're breaking the rules. And sometimes that works out. But you can't, I'm doing this, but not have a damn clue what you're really doing.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like, there's a rule, you're not supposed to do this, and it's like, damn it, I'll get around that. That's to your point. I think it's really relevant to being that foundation you talked about. It's like having that, all these different disciplines that you're aware of, and then shooting through that, and by knowing the rules you're breaking.
100%. So, after we did the first one, on the second one, people are telling me oh no, it should be this short, it should be this, it should be that, and I'm like, you know what? I looked at my brother and I'm like, we're gonna make what we feel is the right piece of content. If it's 7 minutes, 11 minutes, 14 minutes, whatever it feels good to us, that's what we're gonna do. And that's what we did. And they kept getting more views and more views and more views. It's this analogy I use all the time. The guys who work with me, they always laugh because everything's an analogy, usually about pizza, right? But it's if you try and math something out that's creative, oftentimes it doesn't work, right? You can't sit here and say, okay, cool, we're gonna make this album, it's gonna be great, it's gonna create a new genre. I mean, imagine if Metallica did that, there would be no Ride the Lightning, right? Because there wasn't even an audience for that. Nobody knew what that category didn't even exist at that point. They just went into a room and made something that they thought was compelling and went, here it is, guys, and it changed everything, right? So that was, it taught us that we had this power, that we could do things on a global scale if we could align the opportunities up correctly. It also taught me that, the power of being a photographer, a graphic designer, a video, a cinematographer, right? Like if you really do the work and you really understand what compelling images are, it gives you a lot of power. So in going forward, we switched from doing a lot of action sports work to doing more automotive work, right? And so, this was one of the wheel companies that we helped launch. And we're sitting there and we're concepting it and we're like, okay, how do we set this thing off correctly? What is the imagery, right? And of course we were very heavily invested in the video, so everybody's going, hey, a video. I'm like, yeah, video is powerful, but photos are still as, if not more powerful, because it's a singular image, right? It's burned into your brain. We had seen trophy trucks do stuff where they scoop dirt and they have this dynamic, right? And I'm like, man, it'd be great to be closer, to have a wider angle lens, and really show the violence of what's happening, show the power of what's happening. How do we do that? Well, I'll tell you how we did it. We went out illegally and we built a jump on a dry lake bed that's now part of our Mint 400 course, filled it with silt, talked BJ into doing this, and went out and got this shot. And to this day, you've not seen a shot like that. You've seen ones that are similar, but not that wild, right? So like when you now prints change, like now everything is more based on digital. But when you open a magazine and you're like looking at all these ads, same, right? And you open up this and you're like, holy shit, what's this, right? That's what I'm talking about. And that's back to what Dan Stewart taught me is don't compromise. Don't just go snap a shot, create something, right? Produce it. You got to cut the bushes down and paint the wall, do it. You got to walk 3 more miles down the rally course, do it. You got to, make an illegal jump and, pile silt on top of it, do it. That's what's going to move things forward. And we kept doing that, right? So after that, we created a series called Dirt Sessions. And what I started understanding is that in our world, one of the biggest hurdles is the client's imagination, right? So you pitch them on stuff, and generally you're showing them similar images, and you're talking about what you're gonna do, but what you're gonna do doesn't exist yet. So you're asking a person who's, maybe an accountant or a CEO or not a creative person. You're asking them to imagine something they can't, right? And so we started changing the way we were talking to the clients and going, hey, we're not selling this to you. This is a sponsorship, right? So you can't tell us what to do. You can suggest it, you can ask it, but ultimately we're the client. And we got more and more power over our creativity in that. And this is an example of like, again, time of day, look at the lighting. This is, in order to get to this dry lake bed, we had to drive to Mexico. This is Diablo dry lake bed because we chose that lake bed because of where the sun goes, right? And then it's talking this guy into going and spending, $50,000 of his own money to prep a truck to go there, right? It's hard, right? There was a lot of things that had to line up, we spent 2 days, 3 days down there scouting beforehand, right? In order to get all these locations and figure out what the light was going to do and everything. But you look at that and you're like, dude, that is a sick shot. That's compelling. It makes you feel something. We were talking before about being multidisciplined. And that was one thing that really turned me on. And part of the reason that I started my own agency is that when I worked for another agency, I was just doing print. And they're like, hey, you're the print guy, do the creative and then hand it off to the web guy and hand it off to this guy and so forth. And I don't believe that creative works that way. I think that if you're creative, right? And you may be better at some things than you are at other things. But what I find with myself is that if I do cooking, it still stimulates me for graphic design. If I listen to music, if I try photography, if I shoot video, like it all to me is interconnected. And as is the case of the school that came out of Germany called Bauhaus, I'd read about this school being this multidisciplinary school and mixing everything together, including architecture. And now I've never architect something as far as a building goes, but I admire it and it turns me on, it gives me ideas, right? And so that's one of the things that I really enjoy about what we do now is we're not always doing the same thing. We're switching modes, right? So this was one of my clients and they needed a new identity. Their old identity was horrible, right? And so we took on the task of creating their new logo, right? And this one I'm really proud of because, it took us probably 3 months, of researching the market, looking at all the other marks, building a bunch of stuff. And it's not just typing a font on a computer, right? because it needs to be trademarkable and defendable, right? So you can start with a font and then you're going to have to evolve it, right? Otherwise, it's not a unique mark, right? So we're trying to create something that's a global mark, right? This brand is actually a global brand. It's the most recognized brand in motor. You know, everybody looks at it and they're like, oh, impact, there's an X, right? It's not an X, it's a crossroads in the middle of a track, right? And that's what it represents. But this one in particular I was really proud of because, you know, it took a lot of work to get to this point and refine it, and it holds up. You know, that's the kind of measurement of a true mark is in 20 years, does it still look good? In, you know, in all these different applications, right? On a shirt, on the side of a car, on a helmet, you know, all these different things, and this one does. So like I said, Mad Media had been an agency. We worked for all these different clients. We were doing a lot of work in motorsports, and in particular, this off-road race had been resurrected called the Mint 400. And it was rad. We were having a blast, and we go in for a meeting with the organization that had resurrected it, and they had messed up their relationship with the BLM, and they're like, you know, we're not going to do it. I'm like, whoa. We have this sponsorship money. We have all this stuff. We worked super hard to get here. What do you mean we're not going to do it? And they're like, yeah, you know, we screwed up and all this kind of stuff. So we bought it, right? And all we bought was a name, right? So, you know, I actually bought it, and I come back to my brother, and my brother's like, what did you do? You took all the money we had, which wasn't very much, and you bought an off-road race that doesn't exist? It's a terrible business plan, right? And I'm like, yeah, but this race was iconic. It started in 1968. You know, Hunter S. Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing at this race. You know, all these movie stars had raced it. We used to go to it when we were kids. It was in Las Vegas. It was like bigger than life in my head. But I had to get that value out and unlock that. And I really, after I bought it, I really didn't know how we were going to do it, right? So I went and partnered with Best in the Desert, and we were able to put this race on with them doing the race operations and us doing the promotion. So the first thing I did was I'm like, we need a badass logo. We need something that plays to the history of the event, but will look modern. We need 14-year-old kids to be like, that's badass. And we also need the dad to be like, yep, that's badass. That's hard to do, right? You guys aren't wearing what your dads are wearing, right? So it was almost an impossible task, but you know, we worked our asses off doing variations, and we created this iconic image, you know? And now it's easy to look at and be like, oh, it's pretty simple. It's kind of a retro styled font. There's some treatment. There's flags. It's got the tagline. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, that became the visual for the resurrection of this race to return to its historical value, right? And beyond. So what was fun about it though too is that somewhere along the way we were like, oh shit, we're our own clients, right? So now if we screw up, it's on us, good or bad, right? But man, it gives you a long runway because now you can just dream things up and just do them. And I drive these guys crazy that work for me because they're like, man, Matt comes in every day and he's like, let's do this. We haven't even scratched off this stuff off the list, right? And, you know, it's a good and a bad thing because sometimes you do things and they don't really net a return, but at least we're in a space where, you know, we can try things, whereas the people we're competing against, they don't even know, they can't even have that conversation because in order to do what we're doing, they'd have to go hire an agency. Hopefully the agency understands the culture. Meanwhile, we're living and breathing it, and we literally go into the office every day and create new ideas and make new products and see things, and we're like, you know what would be cool? Like, that's literally, you walk around my office, that's the setup for everything. You know what would be cool? And that's a great, creatively powerful thing to have.
Class 11 short course.
Great. This will give you an idea of the scale of what we've created. We drive 150 vehicles down Las Vegas Boulevard to let Vegas know that we're here. We included bikes, we brought the bikes back in. We shut down 6 blocks of Fremont Street. 30,000 people come out just to check out all the vehicles. And then we race just outside of Vegas. This is our live stream right here. It is the most advanced production truck on the West Coast. You've got multiple helicopters, drones, ground cameras, etc. capturing this. Our loop, our stage is a 100-mile loop, right? So that begins to be a problem and a challenge of like, how do you capture everything that's going down? You miss something, you kind of blown it, right? So it's hard. But it's also super fun because you have the crowd, you have the racers, you've got the track, the Mojave Desert, right? The environment. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be windy? Like all these different things. And as a creative, I love it because, like, look at that. That's remarkable. I don't care if you're not into racing, but you look at this stuff and you're like, this is incredible. And so back to what we were talking about with capturing remarkable imagery, you know, we're the ones, the creatives are running the show now. It's not the accountant, it's not the CEO, it's not these people who have been trained to say no to spending money on creative. It's the opposite of that. Now it's the creative people, the creative person is the CEO. And I get to make these decisions with my team and with my brother and cousin about how do we capture what we see, right? How do we maximize that? Because we got into this growing up seeing, you know, Wide World of Sports back in the day, Pikes Peak coverage, etc. as broke kids going, wow, maybe someday we can go out there and check that out. That'd be really cool. Little did we know, we'd end up owning it. So we've moved to this point where it's like we're, you know, pretty much in control of our own destiny. And we've learned a lot of things along the way. One of the things that, you know, had a big effect on us in action sports was X Games coming along. And it was interesting because, you know, we had skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding, BMX, and motocross all separated. They were separate pools, right? But once ESPN came in and put those things together, it became very powerful, right? And it taught us a very valuable lesson that then we applied to motorsports. So that's a big thing that I want you guys to take away with this is understanding the power that you have. The more you learn, the better you become within your discipline and learning other disciplines, right? And it's really fun now, right? I think about being in your position and, you know, living on top ramen, and that sucked, right? Mm-hmm. But it's part of the process of not just you earning it, but getting into the position where when you do earn it, you appreciate it that much more. It means that much more to you. And we, you know, you can ask these guys, we work our asses off, you know, to accomplish the things that we do. But it's really cool to be able to just go, you know what? I think we should do this. And then you do it and you execute it well. And everybody goes, wow, right? There's no bureaucracy. There's no, you know, accountant saying, yeah, you know, it doesn't pencil out. You know, if the world was run solely like that, we'd have nothing special and creative because almost nothing cool pencils out. You know, I've shared with you some images from graphic design, photography, cinematography. A lot of the other things that we do, you know, that I enjoy is, you know, this shirt, right? Still love screen printing. I still love producing products, right? And not just products that are cool, but have cultural meaning, that have impact. And it's, you know, it's a really cool and fun thing to kind of, you know, explore and go like, oh, you know, we should do this. You know, we should create this piece of merch, and it's cool. You know, it's cool and very gratifying to do that. You know, my process, and that's something too I want to move to and talk about, is like, great, how do you come up with all these ideas, right? And my process is pretty wide, right? Like all these different things that influence me that I've learned to like now really wrap my arms around and go, man, I need to go to a concert because I haven't been to a concert next days or whatever it is. I need that stimulation, that influence. I need to go to an art gallery and just look at art. You know, the weirder the better, because if you stay in your box, that's what you're going to do, is you're going to stay in your box. So listen to music that you don't even like. Look at art that maybe doesn't appeal to you. You know, go explore those things. So that's how I come up with new ideas, is I'm going to other events and looking at things. I'm going to, you know, music shows. I'm going to art shows. That's one of the other things I want to stress is don't live online. You can use the online as a portal for information, but go out in the world, because it's a different thing. When you go to another country and you experience their food culture, their art culture, their music culture, that is entirely different than Googling them and seeing what they're doing. You know, I'm always surprised when I travel and go to someplace and I'm like, okay, this wasn't in the travel manifesto or whatever. I've learned over the years too, like, I'm an early morning person. So like I get up early in the morning, I get all amped up on coffee, and I start kicking stuff out. And by the end of the day, you know, everybody's like, let's go out, and I'm pretty much spent. I've learned that that's like my, whatever you want to call it, circadian rhythm, my creative cycle, right? So that's how I do it. You know, I think too, one of the things I've been taught by multiple mentors and people that have influenced me is to constantly work at expanding who you are, right? Creatively, you know, whether it's trying new food, trying new music, going and learning about new cultures, art, etc. That's something that's really paid dividends for me, right? I've pulled influences from all over the world and all sorts of weird corners that you would never expect. It's this saying I always, or this analogy I always use with music. It's like everybody likes to have everything in a box, right? Well, John Coltrane and Slayer are connected. To pretend like they're not connected, you're just doing yourself an injustice, right? So once you understand that concept, then you can walk around and look at everything and go, oh, okay, cool. There's something cool there. I want to listen to that. That might not be the thing visually you like, or the thing food-wise you like, or what have you that you like, but that idea of like constant expansion is super important, and it'll affect your work. The more you know, the bigger your lexicon is, the better your work will be. I want to take a little bit of time to answer questions, because I'm sure you guys have a few questions, so let's open it up to questions now.
Carol, you want to bring the lights up for a second?
I know there's a lot, but there's one surreal moment where you're like, can't believe I'm filming this.
One surreal moment where there's a lot. I could tell you a lot. Like, I think that when we shot with the HVX, right? So it was 60 frames per second. Like, we didn't even really understand what it could do. We're like, oh, slow motion, that'll be sick. And I remember we were in Washington with Travis Pastrana and Ken Block. We were testing cars, and there was one corner, and it was a sketchy corner, and it had these big chunks of gravel in it, right? And so I got down below the corner in like a ditch, and I knew all the gravel was gonna fly out, right? Because I'd watched him corner it, and so I shot it handheld, and it was a dangerous spot to be in. But we weren't. It wasn't a race condition. It was a testing condition, and he knew where I was going to stand. And light was coming back through the trees, so it was backlit, and so barely knew how to use these cameras, right? So I framed the shot, and I did a slight pan, and then that got us the Subaru contract because the guy from Subaru was there. I played it back for my brother, and we're like, wow, right? And then we played it for it was Ken. Played it for Ken. Ken was like, holy shit, right? And then we played it for all the crew and the mechanics and everybody else. And the guy from Subaru is like, well, let me see, right? And walks over, he looks at it, and he's like, okay, we need a car commercial, right? And we're like, cool. How do we do that? We'll figure it out, right? So that was one of them, but I think there's a lot, and I think that's something that like I still strive for. Right? Like what Rick said earlier, which is like when you get to this attitude of like, yeah, I know it all, right? You start dying as a creative, right? And it's a dangerous thing. So, it's one of the reasons why I push so hard to go out and shoot things and do new things. It's like even oftentimes when we go shoot stuff and it's like, well, I'll tell them about our snow trip, right? So we were out heading to Ocotillo, and we're like going over the mountains, and we hadn't planned on shooting snow. We didn't even know there was going to be snow, but we were going to go to another area that there was no snow, and we're looking at it, and these guys are like, man, let's get some shots here. It'd be really cool, right? And I'm like, you know what? Let's try it, and we did. And it came out dope, and it looks very different than anything we've ever shot before. So I think, like for me, that's a constant, right? I'm always looking for that next. Whether you want to, it's like a creative high, right? But it's better, I think, because if it's good, it lives on forever. Like one of the things that I'm really proud of over my entire career, as it relates to different things like Gymkhana, is that when you look at the historical timeline of the automotive world, and you go like, oh, these cars came out, all this kind of stuff, Gymkhana's on that timeline, right? And that to me is something that I'm really proud of. Now I'm looking for the next thing, right? And it gets bigger, right? And that's what's funny about the Mint is, we went on this journey and we're like, hey, cool, we're gonna do this one big race, and it'll be X Games of off-road, and everybody will copy of us, and the whole thing will get bigger, right? Wrong. People are idiots. They're also not creative, right? And that was one thing we learned is like, throughout my career, or actually throughout my schooling, we were kind of taught like, hey, don't worry about the business side. Don't worry about taxes or contracts or any of that stuff. And so consequently, I went out and freelanced and I got worked over, right? Well, I learned very quickly, how to do business. And fortunately, I had my father who was an MBA I could ask questions to, but a lot of it was just self-taught. So now, with the Mint, what's happened is, we've so far surpassed everybody else that they've buckled, right? And so now we have 3 races, and we'll probably have a 4th, and they'll all be that scale, right? Because nobody else is going to do it. Because once you start breaking apart the pieces, it doesn't work, right? Because again, reverse engineer it, and you're like an off-road promoter, and you call an agency, and you're like, hey guys, da 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 da. It's like they're not in off-road. They don't know what to do. It's not authentic. And this was one of the most important things I learned from action sports was you could be a good photographer, you could be a good cinematographer, you can be all these things, a good painter, whatever, but if what you're doing isn't authentic, it's not going to cut through, right? That goes back to why I named Mad Media, is it came from a book called "Do Androids Dream About Robot Sheep," which later on became a movie called Blade Runner. And they talk about how the whole world is going to get busier and busier and have all this crazy content flying by you, you know, like lasers and all this stuff. And the only thing that will cut through that is the truly mad media, right? And that spoke to me, and I'm like, yeah, that's the mission. The mission is to get people's attention and turn them on through the creative process, right? That was a long answer, sorry.
No, it's funny because like I'm in that little slump right there, the creative slump where I'm like I've done it all, and then they have you in the camera or something.
Yeah,
and I'm like a big kid, like oh.
it's something I tell people, like, I go, look, it's the big world out there, right? I don't know shit. And if I don't know shit, you definitely don't know shit, right? So I'm not telling you how to do things. I'm just telling you that there's a whole bigger world out there, you know, of art, of music, of food, crazy content flying by you, you know, like lasers and all this stuff. And the only thing that will cut through that is the truly mad media, right? And that spoke to me, and I'm like, yeah, that's the mission. The mission is to get people's attention and turn them on through the creative process, right? That was a long answer, sorry.
No, it's funny because like I'm in that little slump right there, the creative slump where I'm like I've done it all, and then they have you in the camera or something.
Yeah,
and I'm like a big kid, like oh.
it's something I tell people, like, I go, look, it's the big world out there, right? I don't know shit. And if I don't know shit, you definitely don't know shit, right? So I'm not telling you how to do things. I'm just telling you that there's a whole bigger world out there, you know, of art, of music, of food, of culture to go figure out. And now more than ever, this is a really important idea of traveling, right? Because the level of media manipulation is unprecedented, right now. And it's unfortunate, but that's why we're doing this, is because we want you guys to see us and go, look, that's achievable, right? And this guy came from Palomar. I was sitting in that seat, right? And actually it was in a really crappy room up there, right? It was a
Mobile trailer.
It was a mobile trailer back then. This is really nice. My point is, too, is like, I want people to realize what's here at Palomar and take advantage of it. And if you're interested in, you know, fabrication, go learn. I want to learn fabrication. My welding sucks. You know, like when we started doing this, I'm like, all right, what are the times? Can I go over there and learn how to properly bend metal? That's a creative, right? So take advantage of it while you're here, and you'll laugh, dude. Like, you'll look back at times where you thought you were challenged or you thought you were in a slump, and you're like, man, that was a pebble in the road. It wasn't even a bump. Anybody else have questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned how you lived on like those cheap rations, right? And trying to, you know, figure out what you want to do in creative. So what would be your advice? Like, you know, we all need to pay our bills, right? But then it kind of like sometimes feels like, you know, like I personally get so wrapped up in like, okay, like in the robot mode, I need to do this, to deliver this, to deliver this. So I kind of lose track of this, the connection with this creative side and like having fun. I don't, so like how to balance basically, you know,
Sure.
the rational side, the financial side,
Sure.
you know, and then, you know, trying to be creative and, you know, explore stuff.
Yeah, it's hard, and especially now, right? You guys, you know, it was a lot less expensive, you know,
Yeah.
when I was going to school here. But you know, I just put myself in a position where I was like, you know, cool. What is the crappy job I have to work in order to learn about this, right? And so I can go down a list of 20 crappy jobs that I worked. You know, it's actually it's a real funny story. So, you know, I'm in high school and I learned how to screen print. Well, very quickly, you know, screen printing companies like, oh, there's this 16-year-old kid that can basically run our whole operation, right? And I get hired and move up and move up and move up, and I'm like, this is great. I'm making really good money, and then I'm like, cool. Now it's time to go to college in another city, right? So I'm making really good money running San Diego screen printing, right? And I'm like, well, now I got to go to San Marcos. There's no jobs in San Marcos. I show up here and I'm like, all right, I'll be fine. I'll get a screen printing company. I'll get a job there. Blah blah. Nothing. It's like, it's way more built up now than it was back then. So, you know, the Taco Bell right over here off the 78,
Yeah.
I worked there. Sucked,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was embarrassed for people
Yeah.
to see me working there, right? And then they put up a job board here, and they had a job for landscaping here, right? And it paid pretty good, so I jumped over to that. That was equally as embarrassing, right? Try pulling girls from Palomar when you're out cutting the lawn. Doesn't work, right?
Oh.
So the answer is you're gonna have to suffer. You're gonna have to get through it, but you know, don't focus on that part of it. Focus on the creative part of it, and try and keep your overhead in check. Whether it's your car, you know, sharing an apartment with everybody. Like I had to do all those things, and I can just tell you, you know, I'll tell you another funny one. So we were running screen printing, so like I made all my own clothes. I'm like, cool. I was super into music, so I'd make my own sweatshirts and hoodies and whatever, right? And we lived at an apartment complex over here, and somebody steals all my clothes, and I'm broke, right? I literally had the clothes that I was wearing, and all my clothes get stolen, right? So I'm like, I don't know. I had to come to school for like a week and go home every night and wash my clothes. Well, I'm walking to school one day over here in San Marcos, and I see a group of migrant workers wearing all my stuff. Right? And it's my stuff because I screen printed it, I designed it and everything. So we went and had some words. I got some of it back. But that's just, you're going to go through those trials and tribulations. You know,
I want to add something if I interject, because this is your question, especially now, you can only imagine, right? But even in high school, in anything, you want to try to at least navigate yourself to try to get some kind of job relative to the things you're interested in, and that'll augment how shitty it is. Meaning, you may not be doing exactly what you want,
Right.
but at least you're on the periphery.
Right.
You're a little bit closer to it.
Yeah,
It makes
sure.
it just a little bit better.
Yeah.
I mean, a complete disconnect, and you get buried with bills, and you get overwhelmed, and you got yourself deeper in a hole. It makes it that much time.
no, this is
It's much harder than to be able to get that time to be free, to be creative.
Yeah.
You know, this is for me. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's like
it's a
if
good.
I'm slammed with everything I got on my plate. There's no. It's so. Even as an adult, it's just like, how am I ever going to get clear in mind and be able to start
It's a good
thinking?
point.
Exactly.
It's a good
Yeah.
point. So
Yeah.
like one of those illustrations that worked for me was, I was earlier on before college. I was, in my mind, I was going to be a professional skateboarder. So I went to work for G&S Skateboards in the warehouse, right? And one day I go to one of the guys. I'm like, hey, I did these skate deck designs, and they're like, you did this? Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll give you $100 a piece. And I was like, at that time, $100 would be like
Yeah.
a lot now, right? So to his point, yeah, if you can get in the door with, it doesn't matter. Intern, if you have to
You
do it
get
for
next
free.
door.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good.
You know what I'm
Get,
saying? You just want to get kind of get
And that's-
yourself. That's just one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're probably gonna have a lot of different just jobs. You're not gonna land the first job and it's like that's it. That you're
Right.
never. So you're gonna bounce around anyway. And it's just like try to navigate yourself closer to the things you're interested in, because then that's just gonna make it. At least you have some thought about that, right?
yeah, and
And that's one. thing I
again,
have.
we were fortunate that the time that we were here, there was pretty much an explosion going on of
Yeah, but we
action sports
didn't know
culture.
that.
Yeah.
We didn't know that.
I knew it because I was at every company going, hey, But that's the thing too, is like look around. And that's part of why we're doing this. Is like, we were talking amongst ourselves about how do we do this and help you guys, create this effect. And the analogy that I was using was there's a club in New York called CBGB, and when you look at how many bands and how many different genres came from this crappy little club, right? It's incredible, right? Punk rock, hardcore, pre-punk, new wave, like all these genres all came from this little club as a jumping off point. And that's what Palomar is. That's what North County San Diego is.
Yeah.
We have that potential to redo that, and that's what we're trying to do with you guys, right? So one of the things I would ask coming out of this is make sure you share this with other people and other creatives, and we will be doing more of these ongoing, and we want this. We want to have so many people here that we got to be outside, right? That's the goal, is to get this information out there and get you guys pumped about taking the creative path.
Kev.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Kev's got a question.
I have a question.
Kev's got a question. Go ahead, Kev.
So when you're working in Transworld like those years ago, how did you go about like shooting for those ads? Like when you, like I know some skaters it's hard to work with, just like depending on their lifestyle and all. Like how would you really manage like to set that time apart when they would, or when they were at their prime, or when they were really feeling a trigger or whatsoever? Like did you go out to shoot and film every opportunity you got, or whenever they had the chance to? How would you set that out?
It was a process, right? So like, it isn't like it is now where like everybody's got access to a bitchin' camera, right? And they can go capture really good stuff. So, you had to know somebody, and you had to know those guys, and they had to trust you, right? And the way that I started carrying cameras for people, right? I was their intern, like, and I would go out, I would set everything up, tear everything down. I learned how to process film. I learned everything, right? Because I was like, hey, in my head, I'm like, if somebody's gonna pay me to take photographs of skateboarding or surfing, like, that would be amazing, right? And so that was one thing that was really interesting for me as somebody who's multidisciplined, is that I love photography. I started taking photos when I was very young, but then there were people that I ran into that were way better than me. And so like those photos that I showed you, I didn't take those. Those were taken by, most of them were taken by Vincent Knackle, who's our director of photography. And I met him, I was going to Palomar, right? I talk about proximate jobs. I worked at a photo lab. And the photo lab was funny because we also processed films for ads. So every company had to come in there and have me do their ads, right? So I'm meeting all these people. And they're like, oh, this guy really knows what he's doing. And I'm like, I just was working at a photo lab. But yeah, it's a combination. But now you just have to be a savage about it. You got to tell these guys like, hey, I'm gonna come spend my time and money and help you. You got to help me. And it's hard. I've dealt with a lot of athletes. I've made films on skateboarding, on surfing, and I can't tell you how many times I was ready to, choke out surfers on the North Shore because they weren't feeling it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
But that's stuff you have to work through, right? And I guarantee you, like, you'll find the one who's understands it. Like Blake's a good example of it, right? Blake's this shit kid from El Cajon who basically made a skateboard video with a built VW, right? And created a entire genre and career path, right? And multiple companies, right? And so what's funny about it now is that simple hustle of going, you know what? We're just going to do this. We don't care who pays us or makes money. Now he has major corporations paying him as essentially an influencer to sell their products and make their products relevant, right? And if you follow him on social media, the guy's grinding every day. I call him on the phone, he's like welding and talking to me, you know what I mean? So you can't take no for an answer, because I look at it like this, like, does no pay your rent? Does no feed you? Does no put you ahead in your career? Then it doesn't mean anything. The only thing that means something is if you accomplish it, right? And so if you're working with a guy and he's not valuing your time, screw him, right? Go to somebody else. Somebody will. Somebody will look at you and be like, bro, I got a full-time filmer. Like, we're gonna go throw it off of a roof, right? That's one important thing about skateboarding, is that skateboarding was democratic, right? It didn't matter who you were, who your dad was, any of that stuff, and even to this day, it's like, that was one of the things that excited me about it, is I remember meeting different skateboarders from different cultures and being like, man, this is like, I'll tell you one guy, there's a black skateboarder named Stevie Williams, and when I met Stevie, I'm like, dude, I thought he was a rapper. The guy was so smooth and so cool. I'm like, I just want to hang out with this guy. I didn't even see him skate. But then when I saw him skate, he'd also back it up, and I'm like, oh man, right? And so those guys are out there. You just got to find, you know, the right partner.
For sure. Yeah. Right now, I've just currently been working with a kid from Vista. He's on Baker Skateboards currently, so good start right there. It's just like also other kids from, like we were saying, North County. It is very big in a lot of industries, skateboarding specifically, and it just branches off towards LA, San Francisco, more of like California, and then like so on, New York, the whole like, nationwide, and then worldwide as well.
But
Just like starting small, I'd say, then building a strong foundation and just venturing on from there.
100%.
Yeah.
But also take note of what I said about Dan Stewart, right?
Yeah.
In that, you know, don't just accept like, hey, this is where we're skating and this is the lights crappy, and go bring lights.
Yeah.
You know, compose your shot. Go find stuff. I mean, that was we would get into these battles. And it's funny because it teaches you to look at everything like a playground, right? And so like I still do this, right? I still drive through cities and I'm like, oh, look at that. Like we could jump a car down that and look at what the light's doing. And yeah. And my wife's like, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean? But it's that same mentality. So that's the thing is like, you know, what accessibility of the cameras and social media has done is it's made everybody lazy. It's so easy to do that you're not getting the best stuff out there, right? So just know that and push your limits and try and create things that are going to be visually iconic.
I just noticed that Kevin is wearing a DC sweatshirt and I'm wearing DC shoes, and it's like surreal that we're in a place where DC
Started here, yeah, 100%.
Talking
Rick,
about
you had a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you on that last video that you showed, like, who did the music score and what was the influence? Who do you know? Who did that? Who did the music? Because it sounds. I mean,
We chose that music. I mean, it was done in house, right? These guys weed through all the footage, pick the best shots.
Yeah.
But it's, you know.
It's a super cinematic song. I'm just,
right.
It sounds. You know, I was just wondering.
Well, that's the thing is like, what's the challenge now is, you know, we've got to pick cleared music, right?
Right.
So it's like we have a lexicon of music that we know. They have a lexicon of music that they know, and so we try and find something that
you get licensed to, or
yeah. So we pay a lot every year for you know, licensed music, but it gets to the point where it's like, okay, we've used everything, or it's not what we want, right? So we like to switch styles, and we like to go, look, not everything is going to be Orange County punk bands or whatever it is, right? Yeah. And going back to the skateboard films, like you remember, like we didn't know shit about licensing, so we're like, oh yeah, Led Zeppelin right here, and then Sabbath, and that was all the music we were listening to. But in between that, we had infused it with the modern hip hop and rap that we were listening to, and some of that stuff, like the hieroglyphics. Like I reached out to them back in the day, and I'm like, hey, you guys have a new album coming out? We'd like to use your music, right?
Right.
And that spawned a whole following for that band that they still have to this day. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, Rick, because we grew up on very powerfully cinematic movies, and I feel like the movies that are coming out right now are like, you know, just all one big extension of a bad DC Comics.
Hey, man, I queued up XP1K. I want to test the audio off this computer.
Sure.
So you want to lead us to XP1K? Like,
yeah, don't do the remix. Do the regular.
Okay.
Just go to YouTube and just type in XP1K.
Well, I'm on yours. Just go down or what?
No, go to YouTube and just type in XP1K.
Okay. You want to prep him in this?
Yeah. So, we do Gymkhana, and everybody's like, hey, we want you to do a video like that for us. But most of them were like sedans, so we're like, yeah, we can't really do much with that. So this thing called a UTV, which many of you may know now, they were just finally creating a sport version of it, right?
Do XP1K 3.
Why? I was going to just do the first one. That's the one. Because he's going to lead us right to it right now.
Yeah.
There's
So
a special story behind it, Cam.
they like the prettier one.
Yeah. And Wyatt wants 4.
Well, so that was the thing is like, they show us this vehicle and we're like, oh man, this thing is sick, right? And they're like, you know, corporations don't create culture. They show up once culture's made and they capitalize on it. And that's an important thing to understand. We create culture. Creative people do. People create culture, right? And we, coming from off-road culture, I was like, no man, you gotta push it. You gotta show how wild this thing can get, right? And the first version of this car didn't have very much horsepower, so we actually had to put a turbo on it and build it up a little bit. But there was a location that we had found just outside of San Diego, or just outside of Palm Springs, that was an old abandoned mine. And one of the reasons that we liked it is that it was an iron ore mine, so all the dust was red. And it had some pretty crazy stuff that we could hear. Then it doesn't mean anything. The only thing that means something is if you accomplish it, right? And so if you're working with a guy and he's not valuing your time, screw him, right? Go to somebody else. Somebody will. Somebody will look at you and be like, bro, I got a full-time filmer. Like, we're gonna go throw it off of a roof, right? That's one important thing about skateboarding is that skateboarding was democratic, right? It didn't matter who you were, who your dad was, any of that stuff, you know, and even to this day, is like, that was one of the things that excited me about it, is I remember meeting different skateboarders from different cultures and being like, man, this is like, I'll tell you one guy, there's a black skateboarder named Stevie Williams, and when I met Stevie, I'm like, dude, I thought he was a rapper. The guy was so smooth and so cool, I'm like, I just want to hang out with this guy. I didn't even see him skate. But then when I saw him skate, he'd also back it up, and I'm like, oh man, right? And so those guys are out there. You just got to find, you know, the right partner.
For sure. Yeah. Right now, I've just currently been working with a kid from Vista. He's on Baker's Skateboards currently, so good start right there. So it's like also other kids from, like you were saying, North County. It is very big in a lot of industries, skateboarding specifically, and it just branches off towards LA, San Francisco, more of like California, and then like so on, New York, the whole nationwide, and then worldwide as well.
But
It's like starting small, I'd say, then building a strong foundation and just venturing on from there.
100%.
Yeah.
But also take note of what I said about Dan Stewart, right?
Yeah.
In that, you know, don't just accept like, hey, this is where we're skating and this is the light's crappy, and go bring lights.
Yeah.
You know, compose your shot. Go find stuff. I mean, that was we would get into these battles. And it's funny because it teaches you to look at everything like a playground, right? And so like I still do this, right? I still drive through cities and I'm like, oh, look at that. Like we could jump a car down that and look at what the light's doing. And yeah. And my wife's like, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean? But it's that same mentality. So that's the thing is like, you know, what accessibility of the cameras and social media has done is it's made everybody lazy. It's so easy to do that you're not getting the best stuff out there, right? So just know that and push your limits and try and create things that are going to be visually iconic.
I just noticed that Kevin is wearing a DC sweatshirt and I'm wearing DC shoes, and it's like surreal that we're the place where DC
Started here, yeah, 100%. Rick, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you on that last video that you showed, like, who did the music score and what was the influence? Who do you know? Who did that? Who did the music? Because it sounds. I mean,
we chose that music. I mean, it was done in house, right? These guys weed through all the footage, pick the best shots.
Yeah.
But it's, you know.
It's a super cinematic song.
Right.
It sounds. You know, I was just wondering.
Well, that's the thing is like, what's the challenge now is, you know, we've got to pick clear music, right?
Right.
So it's like we have a lexicon of music that we know. They have a lexicon of music that they know, and so we try and find something that
you get licensed to, or
yeah. Well, so we pay a lot every year for you know, licensed music, but it gets to the point where it's like, okay, we've used everything, or it's not what we want, right? So we like to switch styles, and we like to go, look, not everything is going to be Orange County punk bands or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And going back to the skateboard films, like you remember, like we didn't know shit about licensing, so we're like, oh yeah, Led Zeppelin right here, and then Sabbath, and that was all the music we were listening to. But in between that, we had infused it with the modern hip hop and rap that we were listening to, and some of that stuff, like the Hieroglyphics. Like I reached out to them back in the day. I'm like, hey, you guys have a new album coming out? We'd like to use your music, right?
Right.
And that spawned a whole following for that band that they still have to this day. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, Rick, because we grew up on very powerfully cinematic movies, and I feel like the movies that are coming out right now are like, you know, just all one big extension of a bad DC Comics.
Hey, Matt, I queued up XP1K. I want to test the audio off this computer.
Sure.
So you want to lead us to XP1K? Like,
Yeah, don't do the remix. Do the regular.
okay.
Just go to YouTube and just type in XP.
Well, I'm on yours. Just go down or what?
No, go to YouTube and just type in XP.
Okay. You want to prep into this?
Yeah, so we do Gymkhana, and everybody's like, hey, we want you to do a video like that for us. But most of them were like sedans, so we're like, yeah, we can't really do much with that. So this thing called a UTV, which many of you may know now, they were just finally creating a sport version of it, right?
Do XP1K 3.
Why? I was gonna just do the first one. That's the one, because he's gonna lead us right to it right now.
Yeah.
There's
So
a special story behind it, Cam.
they like the prettier one.
Yeah. And why it wants 4.
Well, so that was the thing, is like they show us this vehicle and we're like, oh man, this thing is sick, right? And they're like, you know, corporations don't create culture; they show up once culture's made and they capitalize on it, and that's an important thing to understand. We create culture; creative people do. People create culture, right? And we, coming from off-road culture, I was like, no man, you gotta push it. You gotta show how wild this thing can get, right? And the first version of this car didn't have very much horsepower, so we actually had to put a turbo on it and build it up a little bit. But there was a location that we had found just outside of San Diego, or just outside of Palm Springs, that was an old abandoned mine. And one of the reasons that we liked it is that it was an iron ore mine, so all the dust was red, and it had some pretty crazy stuff that we could jump and do stunts over with consequences, right? In other words, if you screwed up, it was going to be a really bad crash and maybe even death. You have to have that, because if it's not real, people know it's fake, and then they're like, oh, it's Hollywood, right? And then they're just like, oh, it's just another CGI fake thing, right? And that's true of everything. That goes back to what I spoke about, authenticity. So we pick the location, we build out all the stunts, and we shoot it. And you know, this one introduced the sport side-by-side, the sport UTV to the world, and blew everybody away.
Can I interject a little bit?
Sure.
So I had this conversation with his brother Josh, who was doing like most of the editing at the time, you know, the final editing. And Josh told me, yeah, wait. So Matt sets this whole thing up. We get all these beautiful shots, and he goes, and now I got to go out there. And he goes, I got to go to Polaris and present it. And he goes, that was the first place that he went. And he goes, I thought I was talking to like some salesman or something. He goes, it was from salesmen all over the country. And he goes, this place was like solid packed, and he had a screen like this. And he got out there and did his best, you know, talked like Matt would do, and then showed it. And he said, man, he thought he was going to pee his pants. He goes, I was sweating. I was so nervous. Are they going to accept it? And he goes, I want to finish. They stood up and he got a standing ovation.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well,
here it
the
is.
important part too is, again, affecting culture, right? So this film jumped off this industry, right, which is 10 years old, 11 years old, right?
Yep.
And now is billions of dollars, you know, in sales, right? So this film defined what a UTV is capable of.
And it created a dog race between other manufacturers.
100%. And they still haven't touched it.
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can get that audio to pump out now. Yeah, I should be hearing it already, huh, Matt?
Yeah.
Right there? It
Yep.
should be the engine sound.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
Get a volume on it.
PC. Audio. You know how to. Audio's up. Dang it. Good. Jackson,
Mic off.
just turn it off.
He said he couldn't afford to sit here because we're gonna cancel that.
I didn't get it. Oh, and I still wanted to get it too. Man, how did I go 1 weekend without
Because we won it. It's just, that's the way it works.
PC?
Well, he's messing around being tech guy. Any other questions? It's your opportunity to ask.
Yep.
Would you say that there's more competition now than when you started?
Not really. No, because I mean, you know, you produce these types of pieces. It's hard.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of things to string together. So it's like I look at it as other creatives. Like we were talking about this the other day, and I'm going to keep using Metallica. It's like all you need to do is copy Metallica, and you have a great band, right? Well, how many people have done that? Not very many.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a weird thing, you know, same thing with movies, right? You see a great movie and you're like, well, it's all, the recipe is visual. It's all there. Why doesn't anybody do it? Well, it's hard.
What
Take-
about for these guys?
Yeah, I mean, you guys, there's more accessibility to the equipment and the software and all that type of stuff, but I think, like I said before, I look at a lot of stuff, and we have a lot of applicants come through our door, and I look at their resumes and stuff, and I'm not impressed, right? So I think that, you know, more than anything now, you can outwork them, right? And does that mean you have to put in more hours or whatever? It just depends on who you are. I was that kid who, like, I was never naturally gifted at anything. I just had to work. I had to work and work and work and work, right? So graphic design, I'm like, I had to suck at it and suck at it and suck at it until I got good at it. And that's how I learned. My brother, he's the opposite. He was good at everything. He didn't even have to study. He would show up, read the book like on his way to class and get straight A's. You know, I would study all weekends, all week and everything, and I'd barely pass. It just, you know, is who I am. But, you know, what I see a lot of, you know, I see a lot of laziness, right? Especially for the accessibility of information. Like, you gotta remember, like, I just turned 50, so when we started out, in order to see good graphic design, we had to get it from a book, right? We had to go to a magazine stand and buy it. You know, we had, you would make friends with people because they had big book collections, right? Because, oh, that guy, he has a really great photo book collection, right? So you go over to his house and look at a bunch of photo books, right? You know, online now, you guys can just see all that stuff, but I still think that you seeing things in person is more valuable. But I just, you know, I think that there is a lot more people doing it, but the quality has dropped off. So.
And they have so many different angles with resources with different companies that everything's going to social media platforms, and it takes a lot of time and management. So if you guys know what the hell you're doing, like, there's, you go down this street, there's 100 opportunities for businesses that can use someone of your value.
Oh, speaking of social media, how does it, have you monetized, are y'all monetizing your YouTube channel?
Yeah, but we do it differently. So because we came up through skateboard culture. Yeah. Woohoo! We learned how to monetize on the front end, right? So like when you look at this video, like before this video was shot, we were paid, right? So I had 7 or 8 sponsors in over $1.5 million on this video, right? And I had gone to them and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to be a part of it? It's X, X, and X, and got them involved. And so the monetization on the back end is whatever, right? And frankly, I don't like the back end monetization model, right? Because it puts the onus on the creator to burden the cost of it. And I don't think you have more money than YouTube, do you?
No.
Okay.
Question.
Go ahead.
Lights.